All right, let's click into the new capacity tab. So here is where we're going to calculate the new capacity based under the new VAA guidelines. Now to do that, we're going to want to start with our current capacity. Let's just spell that properly. And then we're going to apply the change per the VAA guidelines. And then we are going to calculate our revised capacity. Now, before I get into these calculations, I realized that I forgot something. I forgot something really important. And I'm wondering if any of you have noticed it. What I've forgotten to do is I've forgotten to declare what the purpose of this calculation is, or the purpose of what the sheet in this workbook is. We should do that for every sheet in the workbook to explain exactly what we're calculating or what we're doing. So the purpose here is to calculate revised capacity using the VAA guidelines. All right, that's all we're doing. Okay, now let's get started. I'm just going to go over and grab my animal information from our current capacity. So there we have our current capacity by animal. And then I'm going to go over and I'm going to grab, notice how I'm using cell referencing. I'm not copying and pasting. I'm using cell referencing to go over and get the VAA guidelines. I'm going to bring those over. I should actually do the same for my capacity. So that way I only ever have to change things once. So these aren't re-entered. We've simply just referenced it over. Now we're about to make an assumption. And the assumption is that an increase in enclosure space will result in the direct decrease in capacity. If we're assuming that if there's a 20% increase in enclosure space for dogs, that would result in a 20% decrease in capacity. That's an assumption. We should always state all of our assumptions when we're preparing our analysis, because our readers, they may not be making the same assumptions as us. So let's set up a section for our assumptions, and let's document this first one. And so we are assuming that an increase in enclosure space will result in the same or equal decrease in capacity. All right, so let's go ahead and calculate our revised capacity. We're going to take our current capacity and we're going to multiply that by 1 minus the change in the VAA guidelines. So in other words, we're going to say that if there's a VAA guideline of 20%, the revised capacity would be 80% of what our original capacity was. So that gives us our revised capacity, but we have a problem here. Does anybody see what the problem is? The problem is that we've got a half of a rabbit. We can't help only half of a rabbit. So we're going to need to round these numbers. So we're going to have rounded revised capacity. And for most of the animals, it's simply just the capacity as we calculated. But we need to determine what our capacity is going to be for rabbits. We could round up or we could round down. This is another time where you're going to need to make an assumption. So we're going to make an assumption down here, and we're going to assume that capacity should be rounded down to allow for the most enclosure space per animal, thus increasing animal welfare. That's the objective of this organization. So that would be a very reasonable assumption to make. So we're going to round this guy down to 13. And this gives us our revised capacity to allow us to continue on with the calculation.